They called it blue water even out here, though the nebular light was more violet than ocean. Commodore Mara Ellison stood in the flag well of the light carrier TAS Oakland, watching enemy range ticks crawl across the holoplot like nails skittering over glass. A refugee chain, or scows repurposed as arc barges, stretched toward the Ayaperis Gate, a silver coin blistering inside the Morningside drift. The glaive combines shard frigates had angled in from sunward, ellipses tightening. On paper, it was a math problem. In practice, it felt like Dunkirk. "Guns tight," she said, voice calm. "We're not painting the sky with civilians." Her chief of staff, Nguyen, glanced up from the operations console. "If we close and screen them, we'll eat slicer fire. If we keep range, the barges die." "This is where humans cheat," Ellison said, and the deck shuddered as Oakland's fighters, stub-winged Kestrels, kicked from the rails. She'd grown up reading about the Midway scouts who found a carrier while running on fumes, about tugboats and fishing craft that dared the channel when logic said run. The lesson wasn't romance, it was logistics threaded to nerve. "Launch the harbor lights," she ordered. 23 battered cargo containers tumbled from the hangar bay. Each one wore a welded scaffold of mirrors and emitter rods, strung with filaments cannibalized from solar farm panels. As they drifted, Oakland's EW team pulsed them with a choir of false signatures, hot wakes, reactor thumps, the ragged noise of a carrier group in panic. The glaive reacted like cats to laser dots. 2 shard frigates wrenched off the arc to pursue the phantom carrier column. Slicer beams raked empty space, strobe bright, insective. The real column, Oakland, 2 destroyers, TAS John Muir and TAS Nisei, and the Kidder cruiser Scathry's Promise, tilted the other way, slipping between asteroid shadows toward the barges. "Flight Vector 15 Blue, keep your burns cold," Ellison said. "We're wind sailing tonight." Cold sailing meant leaning on the drift's magnetized dust rivers. Human helms had learned to ride them like sea currents. The Kidder captain, Threx, clicked acknowledgement over Coalition band, his voice all bright feathers and precise mathematics. Coalition worked when everyone brought a trick. Humans brought stubborn improvisation and a willingness to owe you a favor forever. Enemy comms flared. "Translation burst," Nguyen warned. "They're telling their pickets to cut the chain." "Not on my watch," Ellison said. Muir Nisei flashed the curtain. Their destroyers dropped sacks of powdered iron into the drift, then drove through the bloom with low-energy pulses. The cloud ionized, painting a moving wall of false density ahead of the barges. The Slicer frigate's rangefinders started misreading distances the way an old radar mistakes flocks for storms. Human navlore called it the cold iron wake. Old superstition, new physics. Kestrel skimmed the refugee column at almost touch distance. "Keep your lights off," Flight Lead Ortiz murmured on the net. "If you can see your hand, the enemy can too." It sounded like something a WW2 instructor would say in a drafty hangar in Florida. The war changed, the advice didn't. A shriek of alarms. 1 shard frigate ignored the phantoms, accelerating into knife range. Its spar-white hull sparkled with active defense motes like frost in a blue dawn. It began to rake the tail barge, punching molten bites through the improvised armor. People were on that ship. Farmers, kids, a dog in a kennel that would start barking now because dogs know when the universe goes wrong. "Ortiz," Ellison said, "remember Midway. Bombers go high, torps go low," Ortiz replied. "We only have one of those. Make it count." Kestrels couldn't carry old-fashioned torpedoes, but they could skip heavy kinetics. Ortiz's squadron climbed and then dove shallow, releasing tungsten rods at a grazing angle. The rods hit the drift's denser layer and skipped, a slingshot ricochet gaining speed, before punching along the shard frigate's hull where its deflectors were designed for straight-on fire. The hull bloomed with inside-out flowers. The frigate wobbled, then split like a cracked bell. Cheers erupted on Oakland's bridge and were cut off by the next contact report. "New weight," Nguyen said, and the holoplot jittered as the Ayaperis gate flickered. The silver coin became a dull plate. Gates cycling down, Threx said on coalition band, alarm finally roughing his impeccable diction. Why would they? They didn't, Ellison said, throat tightening. Someone did it for them. The Combine had saboteurs. She'd been warned. A dead gate meant no clean exit, only the long, exposed run through the Kestrel lanes. A labyrinthine drift notorious for eating ships that didn't know how to tack. The last barge cleared the iron veil, engines coughing, and the holoplot filled with red as more shards cut in. Ellison straightened her shoulders. "We'll take them through the lanes," she said, quietly enough that only Nguyen heard the fear. Then louder, "Signal the convoy. We're making the Kestrel run." The gate dimmed to ash. Somewhere within the refugee chain, a ping repeated at 2 regular intervals. "Commodore," Nguyen whispered, "we've got a beacon in the column, a traitor's breadcrumb or a hostage's leash. Either way, the enemy would follow it." Ellison looked at the powerless gate, the tight jaw of her destroyer captains on split screen, the burden of people who had believed the blue water could be crossed. "Bring it on board," she said. "Whatever it is, we don't leave our mess for civilians to clean." The Kestrel lanes opened ahead like a dark coastline, and the first enemy salvos began to light the surf. The Kestrel run was a cartographer's joke sold to pilots as a dare. Magnetic rivers braided the drift into channels that twisted, crossed, and occasionally vanished. You didn't fly it so much as argue with it. Ellison's helmsman, a quiet Kenyan named Wanjiru, coaxed Oakland into the first turn with pulses that felt like breath. Behind them, the refugee barges followed, tugged by secondary fields from the destroyers like kites on invisible strings. "Beacon located," Nguyen said. "It's in barge 12. Secondary emanation suggests an implant transmitter, not a buoy. Could be a coerced mule," Ellison said. "Could be a volunteer. Either way, the signal dies on Oakland." Threx clicked. "If you are wrong, your own ship becomes a bonfire for us to gather around." "It's a risk I own," Ellison answered. "Rules of engagement aren't just about who you can shoot, they are about who you choose to carry." She thought of just war theory lectures at Annapolis in exile, the dry debates of proportionality and discrimination. It was different when the person behind the abstraction had a name. Marine medics in ruck-pattern hardsuits, sleek, amphora-shaped, with careful hands, brought the beacon aboard under Faraday tarp. It was a boy, 17 maybe, bones light with orbital birth. The implant at the base of his skull pulsed irregularly. If they cut it wrong, it would likely cook his brain and ping anyway. He kept trying to speak and then sobbing, mortified. Ellison knelt. "What's your name?" He flinched. "Cade. They said if I didn't carry it, my sister, she's on 12. "We're going to help you," she said. "Not because you picked right, but because you're ours now. That's the job." She nodded to the ruck surgeon. "Do it." Outside, the lanes bucked. A glaive picket slid into a cross current and suddenly had angle. It spit a range of darts toward the convoy like sleet from a squall. John Muir rolled broadside, presenting her thickest field edge, and took the hits with a shuddering flicker. Muir's shields down to 60, the tactical watch barked. "Scathry's promise, take the high line," Ellison ordered. "Use your lattice to blind their scope." The Kidder cruiser unfolded wing-like emitter planes, scattering a snow of polarized photons. The effect was as old as naval smoke screens and as elegant. Their sensors would see ghosts for the next 30 seconds. On comms, Ortiz whistled. "We could cut the channel with a mine scatter. They don't adjust well to static obstacles." Nguyen winced. "We have people trailing and the lanes braid. Any mine we lay could roll onto us or an ally. Proportionality says." "I know what it says," Ellison replied. She thought of Vietnamese and American planners arguing over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, of the way victory sometimes meant deciding which villages didn't burn. No static mines, smart debris only. They dumped canisters of auto-assemblers into the drift. The bots drank the local ions and knitted themselves into nearly massless webs, just dense enough to foul a slicer beam's coherency without slicing a hull if it drifted wrong. Nets instead of thorns. Non-lethals in a fight where the other side didn't know the word. It wasn't pacifism, it was discipline. Telemetry says the dreadnought Hexarch spear just pushed off the far shelf, Nguyen said, voice careful. 3 hours if she takes the straight, more if she tries to be clever. She doesn't have to be clever when she's big, Ortiz said. Ellison let herself feel the weight of it. At Midway, the Japanese carriers were gods until they weren't. At Dunkirk, destroyers were banners until trawlers became the spine. Size was a hammer, but hammers crack when you strike the right seam. Cade's implant? She asked as the ruck surgeon lifted their hands. Booby-trapped, the medic said softly. We can't cut it out whole. We can bleed its power and force a false positive so the Combine thinks he's still in the barge, if we leave a micro node there. You want to deceive by telling the enemy what they expect to hear, Ellison said. Like the Navajo code talkers used familiar words to hide new meanings. For readers who never studied it, in WW2, Dene Marines used their language as unbreakable code not because it was mystical, but because it was specific, alive, faster than cipher wheels. Exactly, the medic said. But somebody has to carry the node into the old hull. I'll do it, Ortiz said immediately. I needed the cardio. You'll take a pair and you'll wear ruck gloves, Ellison said. If that thing pings hot, you drop it and run. The convoy turned through a tight S-curve. The drift here was thick with metallic dust. Wanjiru crooned to the helm like a sailor working a sail against a shifting wind. Engines whispered and mass drivers thumped in patient rhythm. For a moment, Ellison let herself imagine they'd invented a new kind of seamanship. One that would still be beautiful long after this war was a paragraph in a school book. An alarm tore the thought away. Combined drones, Nguyen said. Hundreds, they're seeding the lanes with cutters. Smart debris meets stupid knives, Ellison said. Let's hope the ocean likes us better. Ortiz slipped through a cutout in the hull with the micronode hugged to her chest and 2 wingmates on her shoulders. 5 minutes to barge 12, she said. If I'm late, start without me. Cade, Ellison said gently, you wanted to keep your sister safe. We're making that true. He focused on her face like an anchor in a storm. Will you get us through? I can't promise outcomes, she said. Only attempts worth the cost. Outside, the first wave of drones hit the coalition's woven nets. Some broke apart, spinning glitter into the drift. Others knifed through, tearing holes, announcing their incremental, ugly arithmetic. The holoplot updated. The dreadnought's clock ticked down, steady as a heartbeat. Ortiz grunted. At the barge, planting node now. A pause. Commodore, someone else already tried to cut this implant. The ruck medic hissed softly, which means the Combine likely rigged a second trigger. Ellison's mouth went dry. Ortiz, back away, we'll... The channel blew with static, a slap of white. Ortiz, Nguyen asked too loud. Her voice came back, breathless. Not dead, but the barge isn't alone. There's a second signal riding piggyback. A live saboteur? Threx asked, feathers bristling in his tone. Or a hostage wired like a bomb, Ellison said. Either way, we don't get to ignore it. The drift ahead pinched to a bottleneck so narrow even Oakland's sleek mass would scrape paint. The drones swarmed, and the clock on Hexarch's spear ticked from hours to 1 hour, 42 minutes. They named the bottleneck Sutter's Eye, for the shipyard long ago and the California mill where gold was found earlier still. Narrow, treacherous, full of fool's luck. You couldn't bull through, you had to thread it. Drones reforming on the far lip, Nguyen said. They're learning the weave. Change the song, Ellison replied. Elan sent Kodak, pattern Sierra. The Elan, spheres of translucent coral with patient minds, had taught them fragrant ciphers, packets of volatile molecules that carried instruction across chemical-sensitive lanes. It was a cousin to the way Navajo code talkers used everyday words to map a battlefield. You turned culture into calculus, and the enemy read the wrong book. Wanjiru laid Oakland on her side, belly to the denser flow. The carrier hummed with the strain of staying light in heavy water. Destroyers rode their wake. On coalition band, Threx read off counterbeats in the clipped cadence of a drummer calling a change. Ortiz's team burned back from the barge with micronode residue on their gloves and a new problem in tow. A skeletal courier shuttle, heat-scored and very much not listed on any manifest. It clung to the barge like a lamprey, hard-docked. "We pinged it," Ortiz said. "It pings back with a human handshake and combined meta. It's both." "Kind of like a collaborator ship," Nguyen said. "Or something stolen and booby-trapped," Ellison countered. She felt the tug of anger. It would be easy to categorize whoever flew that shuttle as the enemy. Easy and often wrong. History was crowded with people trying to survive empires by cutting deals, and with liberators who later learned those deals were knives they'd handed to themselves. "Board and clear," she ordered. "But no heroics. If they're wired, we talk first." The shuttle hatch erised open to reveal not a fanatic, but a woman in a jumpsuit 2 sizes too big, hands held up and shaking. "I didn't have a choice," she said, the old universal phrase that made judges grind their teeth. "They locked us into routes. They said if we carried their hardware, we got food." "What's your name?" Ellison asked again. "Sasha. I pulled maintenance on 12. They put the beacon in the water recycler. I figured if I moved it to something I could jettison, maybe." "You did good," Ellison said, meaning it. "But the node had a second trigger. You didn't see it." Sasha sagged. "They always have a second trigger." Nguyen's screen flared. "Combined trying to triangulate our command net. Cloaked scope on the high ridge." "Then we stopped sounding like ourselves," Ellison said. She toggled a circuit. All units switched to Analec's call and response. Confucius by numbers, preloaded passages summarized in 3-syllable tags. The point wasn't profundity, it was rhythm. Humans were very good at rhythm. Machines that pretended to be human missed the offbeats. "Commodore," Threx warned, "if we keep command channel up at all, they can rake the tops of our sails." "Then we keep it low and him short," Ellison said. "We're not cutting our people off in a storm." The eye narrowed, drones dove. John Muir went broadside again, flensing fire, turning her fields into a aurora bright skin. Her captain, Ephraim Cole, took the old destroyer vow. "If anyone hits the convoy, they hit me first." It was the kind of oath sailors wrote in letters home and never mailed. Ellison said softly on a private line, "You've been showing them your best side for too long." "Good news, Mara," Cole said, laughing once. "I only have one side." The convoy slipped through the first iris of the eye. The drones adjusted yet again, sleeking into a spiral whose math Ellison recognized from college. A logarithmic flower, beautiful, terrible. It was how hurricanes organized their rage. "Ortiz," she said, "remember skip bombing. We can skip drones, too." "We practiced on boys," Ortiz said. "These bite." "They'll bite at predictable intervals," Ellison said, thinking of carrier decks and pilots gauging sea state to time a landing. "Match the frequency. Make their hunger a bridge." Kestrels broke formation and dropped to the molasses-thick layer, letting it accelerate them. They timed their climbs not to clear drones, but to hit where drones would be a breath later. Tungsten rods met cutter guts with an ugly sparking squeal. Drifts of drone shrapnel turned the eye into glittering sleet. "Comms pickup," Nguyen said. "The dreadnought. They're broadcasting a surrender demand on all humanitarian channels." "That's a war crime," Threx hissed. "They know we like rules," Ellison said. "So they paint their threats with the shape of them." She opened a reply on the same channels, aware that neutral monitors, if any still existed, would remember every word. "This is Commodore Ellison of the Terran Coalition Task Force. We are escorting non-combatants. Stand off or be engaged." She kept her tone even. Later, she could explain proportionality to a tribunal. Now she invoked it like a shield. The eye's final pinch loomed, a narrow V where 2 magnetic rivers collided. To port, the Sutter Forge shipyard glittered as a ruin, frames of half-built hulls like ribs in a desert. To starboard, empty blue. Somewhere in the forge's carcass, enough metal waited to turn into either sanctuary or shrapnel. A warning icon pulsed crimson. "Enemy drones regrouped," Nguyen said. "They figured out the rhythm. And the dreadnought is closer than it should be," Threx added, uneasy. She cut through the off-channel, brutish but fast. Ellison tasted the copper of adrenaline. "We're going to do something ugly and precise. We'll make the forge swing a hammer." "You mean to collapse part of it into their path," Threx said, both impressed and appalled. Not collapse, Ellison said. Skip, like Ortiz did to that frigate. We throw a hull spar onto the dense layer and bounce it along like a stone. They'll either eat it or spend time dodging. That will shred us too if you mistime it, Wanjiru murmured. Midway was pilots with tanks near empty, Ellison said. Dunkirk was a navy made of anything that floated. We're both. She keyed the forge's dead cranes, waking old servos with raw current. They moaned like whales. A half-finished keel shuddered, slid, and tipped toward the drift's dark skin. Mark! Ellison cried. The spar hit and skipped once, twice, then caromed toward the drone's swarm, which scattered in a snow of silver panic. The spar kept going, a mailed fist now aimed at the dreadnought's projected course. The channel filled with combined chatter, suddenly ragged. They hadn't expected the shipyard to fight back. Nobody ever expects the furniture. Commodore, Nguyen said, and she knew from his tone the favor wasn't free. Nisai is out on a limb pulling the tail barges through, if that dreadnought decides not to dodge. Ellison asked, switching channels. Not me, Cole said. It's Nisai's skipper. Lieutenant Commander Sato says she's planted. She can't move without cutting a barge loose. The spar tumbled. The dreadnought loomed. The drones began to knit themselves into a shield wall, learning a new trick mid-charge. Ellison exhaled. We'll make them choose, she said. And we'll pay if we priced it wrong. The dreadnought Hexarch spear showed its teeth, a prow like a cathedral's nave, engraved in black geometry that made eyes ache. Its fields bulged against the drift as if space itself disliked rubbing up against it. The spar they'd skipped from the forge kissed its forward veil and shed heat in a savage arc. Ellison saw it on the plot like a comet, each bounce transferring guilty energy. Impact in 12, Nguyen said. 11, they're rolling to belly it. No, they're venting drones to use as ablative. Ortiz, peel a squad right, Ellison said. Hit the drone plume, make their shield into shrapnel. Cade watched from a cot, fingers twisted in the blanket, the implant's glow now a dull coal. He'd asked about his sister twice. Ellison had promised nothing and everything in the same breath. That's what command was sometimes, lying carefully to stay honest later. Commodore, the ruck medic said, we can kill the implant fully now, but it will broadcast a death spike. They'll know we took it off the barge. They may punish civilians for that. Then we ghost it, Ellison said. Bleed it at 1%, enough to keep their faith in their own trap. Sometimes the merciful option is the one that looks like compliance. Wanjiru flipped Oakland through the eye's final pinch, the carrier's skin humming. Their intakes sucked at the drift's denser layer, fishing for momentum without burning too much. Fuel had become a new god with a hungry gospel. Nisai calling, Nguyen said, jaw tight. She's still anchored to 12. If we accelerate, we'll tear her toe. Ellison opened Sato's window. The younger officer's face was bright with sweat, eyes flint-hard. Commodore, I recommend you go. We delay, we die, and the convoy with us. You're part of that convoy, Ellison said. Sato smiled, small and human. When my grandmother came to California, she worked a cannery that smelled like salt and pennies. She told me sometimes you stand in the brine so someone else doesn't. This feels like that. Ellison's throat closed. We'll buy your minute, she said. Make it cost them more than us. The spar struck the drone plume, tore through, and smacked the dreadnought's belly fields. For an instant, Hexarch spear stuttered. Not damage, not yet, but the gathered inevitability of mass and motion had hiccuped. Ortiz's kestrels scythed the blooming debris cloud, turning cutters into confetti. Fire Plan Delta, Ellison ordered. Skip bombing pattern along the dreadnought's lower arcs. Aim for where their fields curve. That's where math gets uneasy. Kestrel's dove. Tungsten hammered the bulge, ricocheting along curves, finding seams. It was like watching river stones work a dam. The dreadnought flinched again, then it roared. A slicer beam thick as a freeway painted Nisai from bow to stern. Fields failed like torn silk. The destroyer staggered. Cut her line, Nguyen whispered, as if that could change the past. She won't, Ellison said just as quietly. And neither will we. Threx's Scathry's promise snapped its feathered lattices open like a hunter bird shielding a kill. We will brood your flanks, he said. Humans are not the only ones with debts. The dreadnought's second beam lifted, then jerked. The forge's carcass, woken by Oakland's meddling, had drifted into the lane in a slow, majestic tumble. Not the spar this time, but the ring of an unfinished slipway. It clipped the dreadnought's forward vanes, not enough to break, enough to displease. Big Ship adjusted, burned precious momentum, lost the angle for the shot that would have split the convoy like a seam. "Nice eye status?" Ellison asked. "Fire's contained," Nguyen said, relief fragile as spun sugar. "But she's bled a lot." Sotto's face flickered. "We can still tow 12, but if we take another beam—" "You won't," Ellison said, willing reality to obey. She turned to the ruck medic. "Cade's sister." "We pulled her patient log from 12, the medic said. "She's alive, frightened, waiting for a voice." Ellison toggled a channel. "This is Commodore Ellison. To the people on barge 12, we see you. We will do all we can. That's not a slogan, it's a contract." The dreadnought wasn't content to let contracts stand. It vomited a second wave of drones, this time interlinked by fiber filaments that glittered like spider silk. The web flexed, learned, tightened around the convoy's tail. "Counterweb," Ellison said. "Sutter Forge has a beacon net, old framework for ship positioning. We can rewire it as a rail battery." Nguyen blinked. "We can what now?" "Turn the yard into a slingshot, run current from the forge's capacitors through the rails, spit conductive rods into the web at harmonics that resonate with their filaments, make their net sing itself apart." She grinned, sudden and fierce. "We call it rock and roll." "You just made that up," Threx accused, admiring. "That's what we do." They latched Oakland's grid to the forge's ghosted power spine. Capacitors that hadn't felt love in a decade woke with a hungry purr. Wanjiru aligned the improvised rails by dead reckoning and prayer. Ortiz's birds dove to tag the web with reflectors so the firing solution would have a skeleton to follow. "On your mark," Nguyen said. Ellison thought of virtue ethics, of Aristotle's golden mean. You didn't find courage by reading about it. You found it by aiming between cowardice and rashness with your whole life. Mark. Rods fired, silver blurs that stitched the dark. The first struck wrong and sparked harmlessly, but the second hit a harmonic sweet spot. The web shivered, then snapped along a rippling line. Drones tumbled, suddenly uncoordinated. "Open water," Wanjiru said, wonder in her voice. "We have a lane." "Convoy accelerate but keep formation," Ellison ordered. "We're not a stampede." On the plot, Hexarch's spear bristled. It wasn't dead, not near, but it had been forced to care about them on their terms. For a species built on stubborn hope, that mattered. A chime. "Commodore," the ruck medic said softly. "Cade's implant just received a remote command, the second trigger. It wants him to scream for them." Ellison looked at the boy. He was watching the ceiling, jaw clenched. "You don't have to be brave," she told him. "You only have to be here." "I can do both," he said, surprising them all. The forge's capacitors sagged. The improvised rail battery had one more breath at most. The dreadnought curved to take a final shot at the convoy before the drift widened and maneuver became easy. "Last spike," Nguyen said. "After that, we're back to sticks and harsh language." Ellison felt the part of herself that counted costs flip pages, chose the line worth underlining. "All ships," she said. "Prepare to pivot on Oakland. We're going to drag the dreadnought's gaze. If we hold for 40 seconds, the barge is clear." "And if we don't?" Threx asked. "Then we make a story someone else can finish." The capacitors charged. Nice Eye rolled to shield 12 one more time. John Muir's fields trembled like a tired arm. Ortiz's squadron arced into a last bright loop. In the dark blue water of the drift, the biggest shape in the world took aim. "Rock and roll," Ellison whispered and fired. The rails screamed. The last of Sutter Forge's ghosted capacitors dumped into the improvised battery, and silver stitches lanced the dark. For a heartbeat, the drift sang like plucked wire. Then everything moved. Oakland heeled hard, pivoting around her own mass as if she were a dinghy and not a carrier. Wanjiru's hands were a quiet blur. The fleet followed the pivot, Scathry's promise spreading her lattice like a storm sail. John Muir and Nice Eye sliding to the edges to present thickened fields. Ahead, the refugee barges lurched as tow lines shimmered taut. Behind, Hexarch's spear rolled to bring her spinal lance to bear. 40 seconds. Ellison felt each as a wet stone she had to carry across a river without dropping. Dreadnought charging, Nguyen reported. Drone residuals weaving a cone. Ortiz make them look at you, Ellison said. Always wanted to be a celebrity. The pilot drawled. Kestrels broke, splashing tungsten in a new skip cascade. It wasn't about damage now, it was about rhythm, punching holes in the drone cone where the dreadnought's targeting heuristics would expect support. War was a conversation, and they were stepping on the other speaker's words. Cade sat upright against the bulkhead, eyes on a small repeater screen. The implant in his neck pulsed, eager as a dog at a door. "It's listening," he said. "If I say the wrong thing, it'll tell them you're lying." "Don't say anything," the ruck medic warned. Ellison crouched. "What can it hear? Pulse intervals, harmonics. It's not language, it's drumming." His mouth twisted. "They trained us to be metronomes." "Then we teach it jazz," Ellison said. She toggled command to a narrow loop. "Nguyen, build me a 3-2 clave off our rail's discharge and Wanjiru's trim pulses. We'll layer the scent codec and the analect's callouts on top. If their sampler thinks it's a clean beat, we dirty it." "Bo Diddley by way of Confucius," Nguyen muttered, fingers flying. A new rhythm washed the net, 3 taps, 2 taps, just off where a machine would put them. Humans grew up on syncopation, lullabies and marching bands, engine knocks and club floors. We hear what isn't there and fill it with intent. The dreadnought's drones hesitated, micro-stuttered, tried to lock cadence and missed. "Hold at 30. Wanjiru said. 28, Threx warned. "They will swat." 25, Nguyen said. His voice had the same steadiness as a surgeon who had learned that calm was contagious. The dreadnought's lance spat, an ugly, sun-thick line that turned the drift to vapor along its graze. Scathry's promise lifted one lattice and took the rim, feathers lights flaring in sacrificial brilliance. The beam clawed high. Nice-Eye shivered under the splash, her skin a sparking waterfall. John Muir dragged sideways to scoop refugees that drifted. 15, Wanjiru said. Cade's implant brightened, shrieked in ultrasound. The ruck medic flinched to hear. He clenched his fists. "They're telling me to say I'm on 12. They'll torch anything that isn't that shape." "You don't owe them anything," Ellison said. "But if you feel like lying to bullies, I sanction it." He breathed in, out, then hummed under his breath, a ragged, brave attempt at the offbeat. The implant jittered. On the plot, a tiny red vector peeled off toward the decoy node they'd left. Combined drones surged to smash it. A sliver of the cone unraveled. 10, Nguyen said. The lance's profile grew again, now angled at Oakland's heart. Wanjiru whispered to the helm. The carrier dipped her belly to the denser layer. The drift gripped her like cold hands. If she dove too deep, they'd bog and stall. Too shallow, the beam would rake the hangars and turn pilots into names. 5, Nguyen said, and then didn't say 4 because everyone's heart knew it. "Barges clear of the pinch," Threx called. "They have sea room." Ellison felt the decision's shape snap into place like a cable on a bollard. All ships break toward Sutter Shadow. Oakland stays planted. Nguyen stared. "You're the decoy now. That's the job." Ellison looked around the flag well at the faces that had learned her voice and folded it into their days. "I'm going to ask you to make me better than my worst fears." John Muir and Nice-Eye peeled away, shepherding barges into the wide. Scathry's promise hung a moment longer, then tilted, lattice feathers angling to throw scatter in a fan. The dreadnought obliged them with hate, swinging the lance to cut across Oakland's bow. "Wanjiru," Ellison said. "I know." Her hands twitched and Oakland slewed deeper, skidding on the denser flow. The lance flashed and refracted. It rode the density gradient like light on water and carved a gouge through Sutter's dead scaffolds instead of Oakland's throat. Shocks rang the hull like gongs. Ceiling plates rained powder. Somewhere far aft, a hangar deck blew open to space. Ortiz swore and then choked off her mic, counting her squadron. 2 voices didn't answer. 42 seconds, Nguyen said, voice cracked as if he'd been shouting, though he hadn't. "They got their 40. "They'll want another," Ellison said, because the dreadnought was not done and mercy wasn't a property of metals. Hexarch's spear rolled again, bigger than grief. Drones braided to form a new spear. The convoy was through. Yes, but a predator doesn't wave goodbye because a herd reaches a field. It pursues. "Commodore," came Sado's voice, thin over a rattling ship. "We cannot outrun her if she commits. She'll chase until our people are quiet." Ellison met it with the part of herself that refused to accept inevitability as anything but a dare. "Then we give her something else to want." "Something like what?" Threx asked. Ellison looked at the ruined forge, the living drift, the refugees who had come to her with more trust than she deserved. "Like a fight staged where our smallness counts." "Name it," Nguyen said. "Whistler's Notch," Ellison answered. "We'll bait her into the notch and make her sing." Ortiz coughed to clear ash from her lungs. "Whistler's a rumor." "Everything's a rumor until you draw it on a chart," Ellison said. "Prep the harbor lights, and this time make them an opera." Outside, the dreadnought gathered to pounce. Inside Oakland, the crew turned toward a shape in the blue water where physics went odd, and hope sometimes curled back on itself and became a plan. Maps were polite lies. Whistler's Notch was impolite, a rift where two rivers of magnetized dust met and argued forever, setting up harmonics that could hum a hull apart if you hit the wrong note. Old miners had called it bad luck and steered wide. Pilots gave it a nickname because naming a danger makes it smaller in the mouth. Ellison laid the course like a contrail. "We draft the notch's edge. We don't go through it," she said to the room and to herself. "We bring the dreadnought to the lip and teach her to lean." Nguyen set the harbor lights to grow teeth. The first time they'd been mirrored cargo containers pulsing carrier echoes. Now they became a swarm, cheap foil kites with micro-thrusters, coded in scent and rhythm, broadcasting not just a fleet's panic but its syntax. Formation shifts, power signatures, discipline under strain. They'd learned the Combine's hunger and now plated it with bait. "We can make more if we salvage from the forge," Ortiz said. Her voice was steadier. She'd found the two silent pilots, one eject capsule recovered, one helmet tucked under her arm in silence. "Civilians stay clear," Ellison said, preempting the chorus she knew would come. "No turning refugee barges into decoy platforms." The chorus came anyway on the convoy net, captains of ore scows and water barges and one ridiculous party yacht. "Can shine light," a farmer said. "My granddad used his truck to block tanks in a protest back home. Don't you dare hoard the danger." Ellison pinched the bridge of her nose. Civic duty was noisy and beautiful and dangerous. "We will take your lights," she said, "but not your lives. You'll beam them to our kites and let us fly them. If we fail you, it'll be on our hulls, not your bones." That answer sat right with enough of them to hold. Threx clicked approval. "You are stubborn with manners." "Best compliment I've had," Ellison said. Cade stared at a diagnostic of the implant, now down to a sullen pulse. "They're listening for a triumph spike. When they think they've won, it will tell them where the witnesses are." "Then we won't let them think that," Nguyen said dryly. "We could also fake their triumph," the ruck medic murmured, unusual steel in their tone. "Broadcast a fleet-destroyed cadence that draws them forward, overcommitted, leaning wrong." Ellison nodded. "Do it." They limped toward Whistler's Notch, the coalition flying like a flock, each ship reading the other's feathers. John Muir held to port, her fields patched, her captain all flint and jokes on cold mornings. Nisai tucked the tail of the convoy in close like a sheepdog with singed fur. Scathry's Promise rode the high ridge, lattices tuned to make the notch's first whispers show up as thin silver curlicues on the plot. "Listen," Wanjiru said. The room went quiet. Through the hull you could hear it if you had a mechanic's ear, not sound exactly, but the kind of pressure that makes bones take notice. The notch sang. That's how it got the name. Ellison remembered a seminar where a scholar had explained Stoic practice. "You cannot change the wind," said Epictetus, "but you can set your sails." She filed it next to Midway's luck and Dunkirk's crowds and Navajo precision. The through line was discipline, not a straight back, but attention. "Combine is chasing," Nguyen said. "They like the idea of us cornered." "Time it," Ellison said. "We'll lead them to the lip and give them a reason to lean." Ortiz's Kestrels peeled off sprigs of the harbor light swarm and flung them like seeds into the drift. The kites scattered, then cohort into a ghost convoy that looked exhausted and aimless but with backbone, like something worth finishing. The dreadnought's drones went wolf-eyed. Their cone shifted. The spear tilled forward, knife proud. "Anchor points?" Threx asked. "Forge rails are dead," Nguyen said. "Capacitors spent. But we still have the rods we fired. Their trajectories are on board. We can use them not as bullets, but as tuning forks." Ellison blinked, then smiled. "We strike the notch at their harmonic. We make the rift song climb a note right as they step on the wrong stair. If we do it wrong, we shear ourselves." "If we do it right," Wanjiru said softly, "we throw a giant off balance." Cade tugged at his blanket. "I can lay a false victory pulse timed to their lean. If they shift half their drone web to gloat, they'll lose bracing for a blink." "Do it," Ellison said. "Don't get heroic, get precise." They came up on the lip of Whistler's Notch. The plot showed blue densities stacked like isobars before a hurricane. Hexarch's spear loomed in the background, patient in its enormity. It didn't believe in tricks. That was a cultural weakness, and humans had a long history of riding around those. "On my mark," Ellison said. "Threx, spread your lattice at 45. Muir, hold port hard and be ready to throw a false wake. Nisai, keep the tail tidy. Ortiz, clip the spear's belly with kisses they can't ignore." "Copy," came the chorus. "Mark." Scathry's promise flared bright, and the notch sang louder, as if flattery emboldened it. John Muir threw a cold iron wake that bent the drift just enough to make the lane look like a gentle slope. The Kestrels skipped tungsten-like stones. Each hit a ping, an invitation. Hexarch's spear took the bait, gliding with the confident malice of a shark on the edge of surf. Nguyen triggered the rods. Invisible fingers tapped the notch at very old intervals. Wave met wave and stood taller. Cade hummed the false triumph through the implant, and somewhere in the spear's machine mind a flag fluttered. Party now. The drone cone loosened, bristling outward to display dominance. It was the oldest primate sin in a new alloy. The dreadnought leaned. For an instant, the universe held its breath. Then the notch grabbed the spear's forward veins and shook. Not a fatal wrench, but a sudden weight shift. The dreadnought bucked and lost angle. "Now," Ellison said. "Heave to." It was an old sail trick, set against your own motion to kill speed and steady a ship in bad chop. Oakland presented belly, Scathry feathered in kind, Muir threw another false wake, and the convoy slid past the worst of the notch's teeth while the dreadnought had to decide between pride and physics. The big ship chose pride. It always looks good until the bill comes. "Spears charging the lance," Nguyen warned. "They want the last word. They can have a syllable," Ellison said. "Then we cut their grammar." The notch sang higher, eager, and mean. The first syllable the Hexarch spear managed was large enough to rewrite weather. The lance cracked the notch's lip and sent shock waves rolling. They struck John Muir broadside. Fields screamed. The destroyer slipped, skated, her bow dropping toward the blue trough where harmonics would pull her in and unmake her bit by patient bit. "F," Ellison said, and there was too much in the single name. Cole's voice came back thin and brisk. "I see it. Tell your helms to keep their shoes on dry steps." "Muir, starboard thrusters," Nguyen urged. "Throw a gutter." "Thrusters burned," Cole said almost cheerfully. "Old girl likes drama." "Permission to assist," Threx said. He'd already moved. Scathry's promise dove across Muir's nose, lattices catching notch song like a kite catching a gust, shifting it. The destroyer climbed one deck of invisible stairs instead of falling through them. The dreadnought snarled, drones blossomed, turning themselves into a stabilizing collar. Pride had bruised, calculation returned. Ellison watched the plot and saw the moment the spear would recover enough to rake their line like wheat. She needed another unkind quirk of fate, artfully arranged. "Ortiz," she said, "we have one more skip in us." "Ma'am, I'm low enough on rods I could use cutlery," Ortiz answered. "But yeah, one more." "Skip along their coolant gutters," Ellison said, "not their crew decks. We hurt weapons, not families." "Just war, Ortiz said, and for once the old philosophy didn't feel like a lecture but like a hand on a shoulder. The Kestrels arced, blades of light, and started tapping the dreadnought's underbellies. Sparks and cold vapor sprayed, not blood. On Coalition Band, Threx murmured a blessing from his people that translated roughly as, "May our enemies' children have long, boring schools." Nguyen's hands moved in the background, counting beats, nudging rods, tagging harmonics. "We can throw the ropes," he said. "The what now?" Sado asked from Nisai, voice threaded thin with pain and command. "The yoke," Nguyen answered. "The rods we launched, the rails spent favors, the kidder lattice, all tuned. We can make a resonance lariat. It'll loop their drone collar and tighten when they pulse to steady. We call it a self-strangling net because we're bad at marketing." Ellison grinned despite the war. "Do it. But if it catches us..." "It won't," Nguyen said with the kind of faith you only find in desperate people who passed up easier religions. Cade lifted his head. "I can give you a half-second hiccup in their stabilizers. That's all I've got. Then it'll fry." Half a second was curtains opening and closing. "On my mark," Ellison said. "Threx, give me a swell. Wanjiru, plant us at the lip. Muir." "Say it," Cole teased. "You can tell me to be a hero. It won't change my odds." "Be useful," Ellison said. "Worse burden." "Copy," he said, affectionate, and John Muir slid under the dreadnought's nose, a stray dog snarling at a limousine. "Mark!" Cade hummed the wrong right tone. The spear's drone collar hiccuped. Nguyen's resonance ropes tightened, snagging filaments and feeding them back into themselves. Scathry's promises lattices rose, amplifying the knot. The dreadnought shuddered, rolled, and put her belly where John Muir could reach. Cole didn't ram. He pinned, Muir nosed up, fields grinding on fields, eating heat, hurling momentum into a geometry that hated sharing. Alarms on Ellison's board went mad. Muir's power graph dropped precipitously, then spiked as something ugly rerouted. Ellison said again. "Mara," he said, "Muir requests permission to perform a controlled burn into the notch lip. We are out of gentles." "No," she said. "We need you later. That later gets to exist if I shove this barroom brawler into the jukebox," he said. "Besides, I made the old destroyer vow. It's time to pay." She closed her eyes, opened them. "Permission granted. I'll write the letter to your brother." "Write it to the ship," he said. "He'd understand." His voice came back on all hands. "Crew of John Muir, sing something rude." They did, not words Ellison would repeat to a tribunal. Good. Muir burned. The notch sang in outrage as the destroyer's hull kissed it at a plangent angle, turning angry resonance into a lever. Hexarch's spear slid, lost her contemptuous poise, and dropped half a deck in the invisible staircase. In any other place, it would have been nothing. Here, the geometry took insult personally. "Now," Ellison said to Ortiz. Kestrels drove a last skip line along the dreadnought's forward vanes. Spines snapped. The lance's mouth crumpled. The spear could still kill. She had bulk and drones and spite, but her proudest, cleanest weapon had turned into a throat full of gravel. "Muir's core at red," Nguyen said. "They can't hold." Cole laughed once, the sound of a man who'd found the bright edge of his courage and didn't hate the view. "Get them out, Mara. Nisai, watch your toes." Ellison began. "Later," he said, and cut the channel. John Muir shoved, shook, and began to come apart in bright, brief flowerings, compartment dumps and shield blow-offs, the orchestrated ugliness of a ship dying the right way. The notch took the offering and roared. The spear's bow sank, not destroyed, but wedged and choking on the blue water like a beached monster waiting for a tide that wouldn't come soon. The blast front rolled toward Oakland and the convoy, a hot, complex gasp. "Brace," Wanjiru said gently, the way you tell a child to hold your hand before crossing a street. The wave hit. Oakland folded around it the way a practiced boxer rolls with a punch. Panels rattled. A string of status lights went black and stayed that way. In the hangar, a Kestrel toppled from its silks and shattered without fire, just sad geometry. On Coalition Band, Sado cussed in an exhausted, elegant way and kept Nisai between the blast and the last two barges as if distance were something you could hug. In the notch's glare, Hexarch's spear thrashed. She was not dead. Big ships rarely die politely, but pride had cost her purchase and the geometry had hands on her ankles. Drones continued to spit like seeds. The collar, half cut by Nguyen's lariat, tangled them as often as it helped. Through open channels, because monsters like audiences, A combined officer announced retribution in a tone that made Ellison think of men who kicked doors and expected applause. She answered anyway. "Non-combatants are clear," she said. "This is your chance to stand down. We will render aid if you scuttle offensive systems." They laughed, then demanded her surrender on humanitarian bans again, performing cruelty as legality. Threx clicked the kidder equivalent of spitting. This is the part of the opera where the villain sings about law while stabbing. Ellison looked at the plot and found something new. The spear had a salvage tender adhered aft, a tick that had ridden them in. In another context, she'd admire stubborn dockyard hands refusing to leave their ship even when it grew teeth. She admired it now, too, and hated the way war asked you to admire people you might have liked in a different uniform. "Cade," she said, "if you sent a ceasefire handshake, one the spear would ignore but the tender's safety systems would recognize, could you make a shudder?" "A half-second of don't shoot, evacuate in the Combine's own OSHA," he said, picking up slang she hadn't heard in a century and making it work. He shut his eyes. "Yes, it'll fry me." "Then don't," the ruck medic snapped. "I'll throttle it," Cade said. "Not brave, precise." He hummed and the implant warmed. Somewhere in the spear's tangled backfield, the salvage tender hiccuped into life-saving. Cutting propellants, unfurling orange, literal orange. Some human at a design bench long ago had gotten to that standard rescue markers, lashing to escape pods with a stubbornness any Union man would love. The Dreadnought's gunners flinched for a sliver of time. Training against friendly fire is a hard habit to break. A slit opened in the storm. "Go," Ellison said, and Oakland poured a single. Needle-thin rail shot into the Dreadnought's ruined lance cradle. Not to blow it, to wedge it, to jam the jaw. It hit clean. The spear choked, spat sparks, then finally, sullenly, went silent enough that the Notch's song drowned her. "Convoy through," Nguyen said, and his voice had that thin glass quality of someone keeping the tears from fogging their own glasses. "All barges accounted for." "Nice, Ellison asked. "Still ugly," Sato replied. "Still here." "Scathry," Threx clicked softer. "We are mostly feathers." Ellison looked to the notch where John Muir had been. There were fragments, yes, but also a sense of a space where courage had burned so hot the vacuum remembered its shape for a second longer than physics usually allows. She said nothing. There were witnesses enough. They spent the next hours the way victors always do when they don't forget who they meant to be, rescuing enemies who would kill them later if circumstances were reversed, cataloging bodies without asking whose side they were on until after the tag, discovering, to her simultaneous relief and sorrow, that the spear's captain had chosen to die with his command seat rather than let his crew be taken alive. War is a museum of choices. You walk through and try not to smirk or sob too loud. Cade found his sister in the med line of Barge 12, small, furious, alive. They spoke the way people do when language returns after a long absence. One syllable at a time, then a rush, then laughter that made the ruck medic pretend to be annoyed while stealthily checking vitals twice. The implant in his neck stopped pulsing altogether. It would scar. Some things should. Ellison recorded the letter to John Muir, not to a brother, as Cole had asked, but to the ship. She told the hull what it had done and promised the crew their names in the next schoolroom wall on whatever passed for a harbor. She folded in the dry arithmetic of awards because bureaucracies need handles, then tucked a human sentence in the margins. You steadied the blue water when it wanted to swallow children. Coalition boards convened in the quiet. Kidder and Ruck and Elan and human officers arguing what could be rebuilt and what must be mourned. The plan for the future was the same as the past. Patch what you can, promise less than you hope, keep moving anyway. They reached the Anchorlight Shoal days later, a calm eddy where convoy lanes went from rumor to chart. Traders had hung lantern buoys there once and never come back to check. Now Oakland and Nisai and Scathry's promise added their battered signatures to the comms beacon. Refugees disembarked into staging rings. Not a paradise, but not a pit either. People began to ask boring questions about food schedules. This is how victory looks when it's worth something. A junior officer asked Ellison in a tone that tried and failed to be neutral. "Ma'am, do we name the Kestrel run now officially?" "We already did," she said. "Names happen when someone needs to tell someone else where to aim their courage." She walked the Oakland's quiet transit deck, pausing by the empty slots where two Kestrels should have slept. Ortiz stood there, helmet under arm, eyes on the scuffs her people had made with their own hands. "We should fix these," the pilot said, "or we should never fix them." "Both," Ellison answered. "We'll polish and we'll remember." She looked out at the drift, still more violet than ocean, though blue fit what it put in her chest. Fleet warfare had taught her tactics and scheduling and the texture of a gamble. People had taught her the only reasons any of it mattered. She could hear the Notch's song as a ghost under the ship's hum. A reminder that even the void could be persuaded to sing a human tune if you hit it with the right kindness and a sufficiently clever stick. Later, a student in some sunlit room would read about Midway and Dunkirk, and how a language became a code, and a code became a shield. And then they would scroll farther and find a paragraph about a carrier named Oakland, and a run called Kestrel, and the day a dreadnought learned the basic American lesson. That small, coalitional, earnest, exhausted people will absolutely put themselves in your way and make you rethink your math. Ellison raised a paper cup of terrible coffee to the blue water and the little ships and the stubborn friends. "Make it home," she told the convoy, as if the words could do work. Out in the great drift, lights answered, human as a porch, light left on longer than it needs to be.